Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast. And today's guest is Juan Carlos, who's the president and CEO of Canstar Resources, a TSX-Venture listed junior miner focused on mineral exploration in Newfoundland, Canada. Juan has 15 years of experience in executive management, capital markets, finance, and commercial and strategic development. He's really recently stepped into the CEO role about a year ago at Canstar. So he's going to share his journey with us, the progress Canstar have made, and discuss some of the political and economic landscape within the mining industry and in North America as the new US president takes his position very soon. Juan, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Thanks a lot, Rob. Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. You're obviously an active listener. We were just speaking off air, so you're an active listener. So you know how we structure these podcasts. And so I wanted you to just tell us a little bit about obviously your career, how you got into the mining industry, how your career's developed, going through obviously the last 15 plus years to where now obviously you're the CEO of Canstar Resources.
Yeah, happy to. So a little bit of a different, maybe a non-traditional approach to the mining sector, journey to get to the mining sector. I actually began my career at UBS Financial Services, one of the world's largest financial services firms based in Switzerland. And I spent about 10 years in the offshore banking division there and had the opportunity to be exposed to a lot of very successful entrepreneurs, a lot of different business models, and got to work with some great people. I started there when I was very young, full-time actually when I was 21 years old. And so a lot of my clients also became my mentors. And, over time, I began to understand that I had a passion for building and development and strategy, more so than, some of the financial services work that I was doing at the bank, and had an opportunity about 9 years in to join a client that was re-headquartering a venture-backed water tech company from Australia to Houston, Texas, which is where I was based at the time. And this is the company that had developed basically a form of modular, scalable wastewater treatment systems that were essentially a form of electrocoagulation that were containerized, and had received a major investment from Caterpillar's venture division out of the Bay Area. And had the opportunity. This is the classic. My client was kind of the classic visionary entrepreneur type. Became a mentor of mine and had the opportunity to jump ship. Left the bank, signed a consulting agreement there to do some corporate development work for that startup, and absolutely fell in love with it. As much as I loved the bank and sort of grew up there and got to know some of the best people in the world at what they do, and still maintain a lot of those relationships to this day. Changing from an environment where it felt like 60-70% of what I was doing was compliance to an environment where, every single day you're waking up, you're showing up at the lab, you're getting with the engineers, you're getting with the financial guys, you're getting with the business development guys, you're getting with the scientists, and literally the lab is adjacent to the BD office where we would hold our morning meetings, and you're just figuring stuff out, developing solutions. And prior to that, I think a very influential role that I had was actually helping to build a Houston-based nonprofit called Friday Harbor that provides free temporary housing to cancer patients that travel to the Houston Medical Center. So that was another experience that I had. One of my early professional mentors, Brian Hall, the founder of that organization, brought me on. I ended up being vice president and a member of the executive committee of the board. And just some of those earlier experiences in my career, building things and putting things together and seeing the big picture and understanding how all the pieces fit, kind of set me on the trajectory that I've been on over the last 6 or 7 years. And so this water company, part of their technology was piloted in the mining sector. There were sort of 3 verticals they were looking at: landfill leachate, oil and gas, and mine affected water. And, to make a long story short, I came out to Nevada on behalf of that company to pitch a mining company on a technical partnership, really hit it off with the CEO of that company and their technical team. And a few months later, actually the same day that I got a full-time offer from the startup, I was given an offer to be the president and chief financial officer of this nicely listed junior here in Nevada. And I had a great relationship with the startup. I was totally transparent with them. They agreed with me that it was something that I really had to do and pursue. So I literally packed a duffel bag, moved out here to from Houston to Reno, Nevada, which is where I've been ever since. And I'll say that, and it's been interesting because I was just listening to another one of your guests just a couple of days ago that I think had a similar impression when he got involved with the mining sector. I just instantly fell in love with it, you know. And in my particular case, the mining company had about 10,000 acres of land and a heap leach operation that had been in operation just a few years prior to my joining the company in the Comstock Lode region of Nevada. So very historic. And, you're landing in Reno, Nevada, you're driving up into the Virginia range, you're seeing wild horses, you're seeing the old cyanide mills and, the old buildings in Virginia City. And so I just fell in love with it. And I think, coming from, the banking sector, business was always something that was a little bit abstract. It was sort of spreadsheets and analyst reports and, all of a sudden getting involved with the mining company, right, where you still have the capital markets aspect, the strategy aspect, the spreadsheet aspect, if you will, but at the same time, you've got guys on site that are maintaining the Merrill Crowe facility, and you've got the wild horses in the background and the high desert, and it just felt to me like it was really where the rubber met the road of American industry. And I think very shortly thereafter, I attended a town hall meeting. That mining company that I was involved with in particular had some opposition from a small community nearby that originally was actually called Silver City. Originally, it was a mining focused city, which is how it came about. But over time, the residents had changed, and long and short of it is they were opposing the special use permit that the mining company had. And so I used to go down to the town hall meetings, but I had a great time, I have to say, and understanding, okay, there's people here that have a certain perspective. How can I understand this perspective? My first meeting, town hall meeting that I attended, I remember the community there was approving a waste management contract. And it just to me was just, again, where the rubber meets the road. Here's Waste Management, this massive multi-billion-dollar company in Houston. Here I am in a small little town in northern Nevada, and you're seeing that interaction between kind of people on the ground and the companies that serve them. And so, yeah, I fell in love with it. And, I've had a number of roles in the industry since then, but basically haven't looked back.
I would like to welcome our sponsor, Hawcroft. Founded in 1992, they provide property risk management services to the mining and other industries, using their knowledge, perception, and expertise to offer true foresight across all aspects of mining and infrastructure. Their insurance risks surveys are recognized as the industry standard, as their reports are comprehensive, ensuring underwriters are well informed of risks surrounding your operation and quality control of those risks. Working with some of the biggest mining companies in our industry and across 600 sites, Hawcroft offer insurance risk surveys, construction risk reviews, asset critical and specialty assessments for a variety of mining, processing, smelting, materials handling, power, refining, port and rail operations. So if you're looking for a premium bespoke property risk management and risk engineering service, then contact Hawcroft today or visit their website at www.hawcroft.com. All details are enclosed in the show notes accompanying this episode. I wonder if you just tell us about, obviously, Canstar Resources and obviously how you became involved with the company and obviously what attracted you to the company just over a year ago.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mentioned a little bit about how and why I fell in love with the mining sector. One thing I didn't mention that began to have a huge impact on the way that I began to understand the sector is understanding, what I would describe as, let's say the current geopolitical moment and some major macroeconomic trends that I thought, really would drive the metals and mining sector to be, one of the most important sectors, I think, in the global economy going forward. Um, you know, the way that we got involved with Canstar, it really began with a vision for a diversified mining company that could take advantage of the fact that we are bottom of the cycle, that could identify, acquire, and develop attractively priced assets that could bring new sources of capital, particularly in the United States, where, unlike the Canadian markets, for example, where, you do have a much deeper tradition of retail involvement, high net worth involvement in the mining sector. In the United States, it's just not a sector that's received much investor attention. And I think that fact is changing. And I think that there's a lot of interest now in the materials that underpin, and I think there's something in it for everyone, right? Whether your focus is on electrification and on the environment and climate change, whether your focus is on national security and the defense industrial base, whether your focus is on replenishing national strategic stockpiles, there's something in mining for everyone, whether your focus is on de-dollarization and the importance of gold and hedging against inflation and geopolitical risk. And so that was, what we began to get a better understanding of as I spent more time in the mining sector. And basically in 2023, I had spent 3 years before that working with and helping to build as a founding member of a mining technology company that was focused on the circular economy and tailings reprocessing. I began to focus with a good friend of mine who's now a colleague in the CFO of Canstar, Will Upshur, on this concept for a new sort of mining company. So bringing in American capital, focusing on acquiring undervalued assets, and also leveraging advances in data science and technology to make exploration more efficient. So in 2023, we received backing from a family office out of Atlanta, Georgia, basically the Coca-Cola family. The principal of that family office is now on our board, J. Paul Austin III. His grandfather built Coca-Cola into a household name, and he's been a good friend and mentor of mine for a long time. And we received backing from him. We kind of built our advisory team, and then we began a really extensive search to find the right vehicle and the right platform and the right asset base for us to get started. We spent the better part of 6 months, and we did everything from reaching out to our contacts in the industry. We looked at a number of different opportunities that we could have financed, and ultimately through a relationship with Altius Minerals, which is one of the major shareholders of Canstar, we were introduced to the board and management of Canstar, and we fell in love with the company right off the bat. I pretty much hit it off with Rob Bruggeman, their CEO, and the things that we liked about Canstar basically was, first and foremost, we were looking for a TSX-V listed company versus a CSE listed company, something that would be a little bit more accessible to American investors. And we were looking for a company that had a really good and attractive and compelling exploration asset base. So we're, basically always asking ourselves, do these assets have the potential to become a mine? Do they have the potential to host, a tier 1, tier 2 level discovery? We loved the people. Because, from our standpoint, what we were looking for was not just to take over a company, but to really merge with a company and sort of build this foundation for growth and success. And, I think if you were to start today, even over the last year, I would say that this has become even more true to me. If you were to sort of start from ground zero and say, what are the kinds of people, who are the people that I would want to, put on the board, an advisory board of an early stage mining company, I think the Canstar board is exactly that. We've got just the right mix of experience and, I think industry reputation. And then, also we love, the jurisdiction. I think jurisdiction's everything when it comes to these kinds of projects. As you know, Newfoundland's a phenomenal jurisdiction. I think it's just emerging as a major hub of mining investment, even though it does have a long history of mining, which I can get into when I talk about the assets a little bit. And so that combination of, liking the investors with Eric Sprott and Altius, liking the people involved with the company, really being excited by the assets, we just felt this was, the perfect platform for us to build from.
Just wondering if you can obviously speak now about obviously the company's projects and key objectives, and also what differentiates Canstar from maybe other companies within that jurisdiction, and within obviously the junior space as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can get into some of the, let's say, business model or strategic components of the way that we're positioning ourselves, which I do think are important differentiators for us in a lot of ways. But just, focusing briefly on the assets themselves, there's really two main project areas, let's say, that we have at Canstar. One of them we call the Buckens Mary March project area. It's really two separate VMS projects that are in the heart of the Buckens VMS district in Newfoundland. So as many of your listeners will be aware, the Buckens mine in Newfoundland mined 5 deposits, totaling about 16.9 million tons of material that were processed there by ASARCO over about 60 years from 1928 into the late 1980s. For at least 50 years of operations, that mine was considered to be the highest grade mine in the world. So there's a very special VMS system in central Newfoundland, and just to give you an example, the overall metal content of the material that was processed there was above 20% overall metal content by volume. So very high grade, very zinc dominant, but also over the course of that mine, even though it was really a zinc dominant with significant copper and lead VMS. You had almost 1 million ounces of gold produced as well over that period of time. So significant precious metals credits as well. We have two properties totaling about 130 kilometers squared in the Buckens district. The Buckens project is right in the core of the old Buckens mining district, so literally surrounded by the 5 deposits that were mined by ASARCO. And the hypothesis there is really exciting. Basically, we believe that the Buckens River Formation, which is the host geological unit that hosted all 5 of the Buckens deposits that were mined by ASARCO, plunges down and continues at depth under the entirety of the Buckens property that we hold there. And, I think that's demonstrated by the geological modeling that we've done. It's demonstrated by the, in addition to the geological modeling, 2017 SkyTem survey, Adventus, company called Adventus did a 2017 SkyTem survey that identified a really interesting conductive anomaly, multiple kilometers of conductive anomaly at the depths that coincide with this host geological unit. There's also an interesting feature when you look at the 3D geological model that we prepared in Leapfrog, you can actually see the high grade drill intercepts from the Buckens mines plunge down towards that property line consistent. So you have sort of multiple overlaying sources of information. And then when you look at the drill traces from the old timers, what you can see is that, because they did drill a bit on the property that we hold, what you can see is that without the benefit of geophysics, they weren't able to see this anomaly and understand the way that these formations, the geometry of the formation, let's say. And so basically all of these drill intercepts missed that formation, missed that anomaly. It's a really striking visual when you look at the 3D geological model there. So that's the Buckens project. We're surrounded by a company called Cantera, which has, amongst other things, a lot of the property that ASARCO formerly owned and mined. They recently announced some drill results, including about 3% copper equivalent over 60 meters from some initial drilling that they've done on the claims immediately adjacent to us, and they've tripled their market cap, I think, from about 10 million to about 30 million on that news alone. So I think a huge amount of potential for additional discovery on this property. And then near that, just a couple dozen kilometers away from the Buckens project, we have the Mary March project. That's another really interesting VMS project, the highest grades ever found via historical exploration in the Buckens district, outside of the heart of the Buckens district proper, all came from the Mary March project. A handful of years ago, a previous operator hit a really interesting discovery hole there at the Mary March project, about 9.63 meters of almost 20% metal content by volume, very high zinc credits, over 50% zinc. I was actually at that project site in September, and there's sections of that drill intercept that are over 40% zinc, so very high grade. The opportunity there is a little bit different. It's shallower than Buckens, but that being said, this particular drill intercept is interesting because you can see, and you can visually see this when you examine the core, that this VMS fragment that was intercepted with the drill intercept is really, it's faulted off. So we know whatever system produced this mineralization, that mineralization's, it's thicker than 10 meters, but it's faulted off and it's been displaced. And so it's really about understanding the displacement vector, where the rest of that system is. And that's going to require, we think, more advanced technology. So we're working on some really compelling and interesting technology partnerships that can, leverage advanced data science, more advanced geological modeling, combined with some additional trenching and some additional geophysics. We think we can, basically reverse engineer the structural setting there and lead to a discovery. And then finally, and I'll wrap up here with a summary of our Golden Bay project. The Golden Bay project is really interesting. It caused Eric Sprott to come into the company when this company acquired a Golden Bay from Altius, which I believe I mentioned before is one of our major shareholders, Altius Minerals. So the Golden Bay project is a district scale orogenic gold project. It's about 650 square kilometers of land, most of it contiguous in south central Newfoundland. It's a classic orogenic belt setting. We have about 90 kilometers of strike on the Day-Cove Thrust, which is one of the major regional geological features on the island. And the thing that really stands out to you, there's a couple things about the Golden Bay project. In addition to the scale, it's really the magnitude of gold anomalism that you see at that project. And for example, we have over 400 bedrock samples on the property that are grading over a gram per ton, over 100 grading over 10 grams per ton. You have a 30-kilometer soil anomaly and till anomaly trend that I think is very underexplored because most of the exploration has been outcrop driven. About 60% of the property is covered in till, and I think there's a lot of untapped potential in better understanding the tills to vector into the source of the major gold anomalism that we're seeing. But what's interesting about that project and what's nice about exploring under till cover there is the tills are very shallow. You're talking maybe 10 to 20 to 30 feet. Where there is till, there also are areas that have very high golden outcrop. Some initial drilling there, intersected some high grade gold, significant high grade gold, some really compelling drill intercepts there. But the thing that really intrigued us about Golden Bay was its antimony potential. So this project sits about 90 kilometers from the Beaverbrook antimony mine, which for a time was basically the only producing source of antimony in North America. It's a Chinese-owned mine that's now in care and maintenance, and this mine, I want to say the reserves are something like 2.9 million tons at about 3% antimony. And so we're, right in the same structural setting as this Beaverbrook antimony mine. And there have been some really compelling antimony findings with sort of, let's say, initial and historical exploration of the Golden Bay project, including about 74% antimony in a bedrock vein in the Le Pouvoir area of the project, and an initial drill hole from about 15 years ago that hit 30% antimony over 1 meter. A lot of underexplored antimony potential there. So we actually see that project as being analogous to some of the great antimony gold producers in the world. I think when you look at Perpetua Resources in Idaho and what they've done reviving the old stibnite mine there, we think there's a similar potential for exploration for not only high grade gold but also very high grade antimony at the project. And previously the focus there was really gold, so it's kind of a new ground that we're breaking at the project there.
If we zoom out and look at obviously a bigger picture from a strategic point of view, how is Canstar positioning itself for success in the current geopolitical moment? And obviously there's a lot of things going on geopolitical around the whole world. So yeah, just wondered if you can give us your point of view on that.
Yeah, definitely. No. And look, I think geopolitics and national security is really baked into our DNA as a company. It was a huge reason why we wanted to start this venture. It's a huge reason why we set out to find a company like Canstar. We very much believe that we are on the cusp of the next major commodity supercycle. And when you look at the last supercycle, it really began in September of 2001 when the United States basically traded a Security Council vote from China for World Trade Organization membership, right? And that kind of set off the super cycle that really ended in 2011 or so. Since then, I think we've seen some mini cycles, if you will, that are sort of more commodity specific. We've seen that in lithium, more recently uranium. Gold has had its moments for sure. But I do think we're entering the next super cycle where, broadly speaking, we're going to see increases in commodity prices that are going to be sustained until we get supply that's in balance with the demand that we're going to expect from multiple sectors here. I think the key drivers are basically going to be, obviously, from a precious metal standpoint, de-dollarization and sticky inflation. I think, gold, I would expect to continue to see gold in that $3,000 range over the coming year and beyond. I think, you're seeing major gold purchases from China, but I think in general was kind of this movement in the BRICS, even though I don't think the United States dollar's status of the global reserve currency is currently threatened. I do think that you're going to see, more of a shift towards purchasing this asset class. You're going to see, in addition to that, the big focus on great power competition. So I think, one of the most significant changes in U.S. foreign policy, really since the end of the Cold War, took place under the Trump administration. Trump won, if you will, but began to accelerate even under the Biden administration. I think it's set to continue under Trump, which is the major break in relations with China. Obviously, there's still a lot of, linkages there from an economic standpoint, from a trade standpoint. But the big change that took place under Trump 1 was recognizing that China was, really a major geopolitical competitor with the United States. And ultimately, China has positioned themselves to dominate the supply chain for critical minerals, as you know, not only from the standpoint of where these minerals are produced, where many of these minerals are produced, but also where many of them are processed. And so, I think that shift is now creating an environment where we're seeing tens of billions of dollars being allocated in the United States, in addition to other countries in the West, towards developing these mineral projects, towards developing the downstream infrastructure for that. So, again, this is something that's been sort of built into our DNA. Will Upshur, who's our CFO, did his master's degree at Johns Hopkins, spent about 18 months in Afghanistan as a civilian doing counterinsurgency strategy, was formerly with Booz Allen Hamilton, which is kind of the premier management consulting firm serving the U.S. public sector. We initially brought in as key team members and advisors for us Nyla Beth Gavell, who's a board observer and strategic advisor, spent a number of years at the head of major American companies focused on the U.S. public sector and U.S. government. So she was the vice president at Booz Allen Hamilton. She was the head of public sector strategy at Verizon. She was vice president of corporate strategy at SAIC, a major Fortune 100 technology company. With a lot of national security implications. And then most recently, we brought in Dr. David Kilcullen. We're really excited about his appointment. He's a best-selling author, was also chief strategy officer for counterinsurgency for the U.S. State Department, senior advisor to Condoleezza Rice. His wife, Dr. Janine Davidson, actually was undersecretary of the U.S. Navy under President Obama and is currently chair of the Defense Policy Advisory Board for the Department of Defense. So, again, kind of from the very beginning, we've looked to build out this national security, the relationships and the focus. And one of the things that's been exciting for us is to see how the Department of Defense just in the last year has begun directly investing in Canadian projects. So this cross-border collaboration aspect of the current geopolitical environment, I think, is a really important component that we're capitalizing on.
Yeah. And I suppose moving on from that, obviously, what are your thoughts on market perspectives for this coming year, 2025? And obviously looking at the political climate change in the US, obviously with President Trump about to be inaugurated into the White House, and obviously looking at Canada and obviously outside the North American market. How do you see all this playing out, and how important is it for our mining industry?
Yeah, definitely. Just to begin with the end there, I think in terms of understanding the current political context, particularly in the United States, I think it's important to look past the rhetoric. I think it's really important to understand. In fact, if you want some insight into sort of the machinations of the Trump campaign and the Trump strategy, I would recommend a podcast with David Axelrod, the Axe Files, where he interviews Chris LaCivita, who ran Donald Trump's campaign. It's a really interesting and insightful podcast. But one of the things that they cover there is that Trump, consciously uses rhetoric and outrage in the age of social media and sort of algorithmically driven, virality, for lack of a better way of describing it, to generate a bunch of earned media. I mean, I think that was one of the big stories that came out of the 2016 election. Even though, pardon, the Harris campaign outspent the Trump campaign about 3-1, the Trump campaign effectively doubled the amount of earned media that the Harris campaign got, in part leveraging this outrage. So you hear about Donald Trump, talking about, making Canada the 51st state or something like that, right? I think it's important to look past the rhetoric and to look at shared interests. And I think the shared interests in the West have never been stronger. I think there's never been in particular, when you look at, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which I think has been a major unifying factor in the West. When you look at, the threat that Chinese subsidized, economic power poses to, companies like Volkswagen or Ford. And when you look at, the degree to which the redistribution of the supply chain for critical minerals absolutely requires collaboration amongst the democratic and allied Western democracies of the world. I think there's going to be, I think the ground is really fertile for collaboration between these countries. And I think you're going to see, as I was mentioning earlier, much more cross-border collaboration. I think when you understand the opportunity that the mineral sector has in particular, it's important to understand that the original executive orders focusing on critical minerals as a tool of national security were really promulgated under the original Donald Trump administration. And so I think, under the Trump administration, you're going to continue to see that focus on critical minerals. It will probably have less to do, at least rhetorically, with climate change and electrification and the energy transition, although those are facts that will continue to drive policy and drive investment. And there'll be more rhetoric around national security, the rebuilding of the defense industrial base, for example. One stat that I thought was particularly interesting that came out from some research I was doing recently was just looking at the amount of capital that NATO is investing into hard capital expenditures. So for the first time, you had this last year in 2024, you had almost every single member of NATO hit that 2% mark. There's a couple of notable exceptions to that, hit the 2% of GDP target for military spending. But what's maybe more interesting than that is that NATO has another target that's a little bit less publicized, in addition to having the 2% of GDP target for overall military spending, which is NATO has a target of about 20% of total military expenditures on major equipment, hardware, the kinds of things that are going to be relevant to the mining sector. They've had that 20% target for some time. They've typically been at about 14%. Last year, it dramatically accelerated to over 30%. So I think you're going to see more of a focus on sort of the defense industrial base. And I think that's going to be important to the mining sector. I think when you think about the world at large, I think you're going to see more pricing dislocations that are going to be favorable for the mining sector. So when we originally were putting together kind of the vision case for us before we go, as we were going out and looking for a company and ultimately found Canstar, one of the case studies that we looked at was a 2010 case study from China and Japan involving rare earth elements, where a dispute over some unoccupied islands in the South China Sea, where Japan actually ended up detaining some Chinese fishermen, led China to curb certain exports of rare earth elements, caused prices to skyrocket thousands of percentage points. That was relatively short-lived. I think we're going to see that similar effect, and we believe that we would see that similar effect. I think that was proven, for example, with the antimony export restrictions, which over doubled the price of antimony just this last year. I think you're going to see that in rare earth elements. I think you're going to see that with antimony. I think you're going to see that accelerate, which is going to create a lot of opportunity for miners, especially those that can maybe get ahead of the curve a little bit, which is what we've tried to do with some of these national security relationships that we've had, understand which are going to be the commodities that are going to be the most sensitive to these pricing dislocations. And I think you're going to continue to see inflation be a factor, which is going to be important for the price of gold. So, I think, in addition to these kind of global macro factors, another thing that I would just add is that you are starting to see, in my opinion, some of the activity on the ground that is making, is indicating to us that we're sort of, seeing the end of the bottom of the cycle and sort of beginning to accelerate into the next top. Talking to service providers, they're seeing, a number of orders pick up. Availability, if you want really high quality geophysicists, for example, is now, you're looking multiple months out. So I think there's a lot of favorable factors here that we're seeing, not only from a global macro standpoint, but also, from, let's say, from a bottom up standpoint, that are indicating to us that it's going to be a really exciting year for the mining sector in 2025.
Yeah. And again, following on from what you're saying, obviously the life cycles, obviously we're seeing now, there seems to be a bit of bullishness in the mining sector. And obviously, as you mentioned, the belief that the tide is beginning to turn from the bottom of obviously the cycle to acceleration to the top. I just wondered if you can comment on that and how you see this playing out over the coming years.
Yeah, no, look, I think, the mining sector has obviously faced a lot of challenges. And I think in the junior mining sector in particular, you've seen challenges around access to capital. You've seen challenges around storytelling and narrative. And, I think one of the things that I notice as being maybe the most exciting is the opportunity to bring in a new investor to engage the public in a new way, given the relevance of the mining sector. And again, there's something in it for everyone, whether your focus is on national security, whether your focus is on inflation and investment in the case of precious metals, whether your focus is on the energy transition. I find, I mentioned I began my career in offshore banking. I used to do a lot of work in Southern California. If you would have told me 10 years ago that I would be in Southern California or Northern California and talking to technology investors about the mining sector and finding real genuine interest, I wouldn't have believed you, right? I mean, this used to be almost a taboo sector. There was an article that Will and I were discussing the other day in the New York Times. This is the professor of environmental sciences from Wellesley College writing in the New York Times, talking about how new mines, more mining was absolutely essential to meet global climate objectives, right? So I think there's a very exciting backdrop for the mining sector. And one of the things that I find interesting, being a bit of a contrarian, I do like the fact the sector's actually been out of favor. I think that actually gives us a lot of advantage. And I think when you're out there talking to investors who are focused on, NVIDIA, or if they're private company investors looking at, AI opportunities, software opportunities, those obviously are going to continue to be relevant and continue to be exciting for investors. But I find people are actually really excited to hear a different story, to hear about the materials that underpin these technologies. I think it's a really fun story to tell. That being said, I think that the companies that are going to be successful in this next cycle are going to be the ones that effectively tell that story, because I do think that while there is a big market of potential new investors, potential new capital, I think it's really going to take being proactive, getting out there, engaging people, identifying people, and I think addressing candidly some of the challenges that the sector's had before with transparency and communicating very difficult, complex subjects. You and I were discussing before we recorded the importance of maybe having more long form sort of authentic conversations to bring people behind the scenes, if you will, not simply releasing press releases, but kind of going through the typical kind of corporate jargon when it comes to these projects. So yeah, I think the environment's very exciting. I mean, look, I think that there is, if I could put it this way, a perfect storm for the mining sector. Because you do have the inflation, de-dollarization, you have these national security issues. I mean, the sector is now in a position that I would sort of say was maybe similar to the way that the oil and gas sector was important in the late 70s and early 80s, around the time of the OPEC crisis, where, countries in the West realized, look, we cannot simply allow our key national security interests to be dictated by geostrategic rivals. So yeah, I think we're in a perfect storm. I think there's a lot of opportunity, but I do think the companies that are going to be the most successful in this environment are going to be those that can really be proactive and sort of be missionaries, if you will, for the sector. But I think it's an exciting opportunity.
Yeah. Obviously, you've been the CEO of Canstar for just over a year now. What are some of the key challenges associated, obviously, with and from your experience from the junior mining industry, and how are we addressing these within the business model in terms of the junior mining space? Because obviously, I get a lot of guests come on that are from the junior mining sector, and they have numerous challenges from all different angles. I just wonder, from your perspective, what are some of the key challenges that you faced coming in as the CEO to a junior mining company, and how you've overcome some of those with the business model that you're adopting?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, look, I think that one of the things that you learn, and I'm sure, given your expertise working with people in placement and recruiting, high level executives in the mining sector, you probably come across this a lot. There are different personality types. I think there's different roles that are appropriate for different people. I do think that, a leadership position with a junior mining company is not necessarily for the faint of heart. I think you have to be able to embrace a certain amount of uncertainty. I think when you look at the challenges that the junior mining sector is faced, in particular, challenges with access to capital, that's really where we began our focus in building Canstar. So bringing in an investor like J. Paul Austin III, who did have a lot of let's say venture capital expertise, quantitative finance expertise, even ag tech expertise, but had never before really been involved in the mining sector. That was kind of proof of concept for us that there is going to be an appetite from investors that haven't necessarily been traditional investors. And that being said, I think when you're speaking to that kind of investor, you need to speak in a way that maybe is a little bit different from the way that the junior mining sector has been promoted in the past. I think you need to be, for example, from an exploration standpoint, I think you have to be more transparent about the risk reward associated with exploration. And I think you have to take more of a portfolio driven approach. And that's one of the things that we liked about the asset base that we have with Canstar, is that we do have the kind of scale where you can have multiple potential deposits. You have multiple, let's say, exploration risk factors that you can diversify your exploration activities there. And in addition to that, we have a foundation where we can begin to grow our asset base and bring in, more advanced projects as well, which kind of diversifies our risk a bit there. So it's taking a little bit of a different business model approach there. That's bringing in new sources of capital. And it's building that foundation to be able to position ourselves to receive some of this government support where, I think when you look at whether it's the Thacker Pass lithium project out in Nevada that got $2.6 billion loan from the Department of Energy, or you look at, Perpetua Resources, Stibnite Mine in Idaho that got $24 million for, feasibility work, and then up to $1.8 billion from the Export-Import Bank of the United States. That's been a big factor for us in the way that we position ourselves. So we did very early on, in addition to bringing on some of the advisors that I mentioned, we did seek to join and ultimately were accepted into the Tech Hub Consortium here in the United States. I think that is, it's an interesting group. So the CHIPS Act, which was passed by the Biden administration, allocated about $10 billion. There's more capital and, other branches of the government and other legislation, but just the CHIPS Act in particular allocated about $10 billion of capital to, develop the critical mineral supply chain in the West. And as part of that, the U.S. Economic Development Authority developed this Tech Hub initiative, which we were fortunate that the University of Nevada in Reno here was one of only 12 institutions in the United States out of hundreds that applied to be part of this Tech Hub consortium to be, designated as an official tech hub. And so we're a part of that consortium. What's really interesting is the state of Nevada, just given the scales of the economy of when you look at Canada and the United States, the state of Nevada actually recently executed bilateral trade agreements with the province of Ontario and the province of Quebec. We've spoken with government officials in Newfoundland. I think there's the potential to have that kind of an agreement and that kind of collaboration between Newfoundland and Nevada. So, we're positioning ourselves in terms of the people that we're bringing in, the organizations that we're being a part of, the way that we're thinking about investing in the space, and the way that we're communicating, and the capital base that we've built. And I think that's going to continue to be a big focus for us going forward. One other thing that I would mention that's been really important for us is the technology side. And, one of the things that you sort of, and I think it's actually maybe a very key challenge, but also a major opportunity for the sector, is that the way that we think about exploration, it's really about the acquisition of data and the interpretation and understanding of that data. And one of the things that you see, I think, with almost all junior mining companies is how data can be so siloed. So you have your geophysical database and sort of one set, you have your GIS kind of in another set, maybe you have Leapfrog and you have your 3D geological modeling. And I think the best geologists ultimately are able to sort of synthesize all of this information and, reach the conclusions that they need to reach about the best way to advance a project. But I do think the siloing of this information creates a lot of challenges, that it prevents people from being able to see the big picture. And so, kind of from day one, we've been focusing on developing partnerships with technology companies. I think probably the leader in the space is a company called Cobalt Metals, that I'm sure you're familiar with and your listeners are familiar with. They just raised another $517 million in their Series C at a $2.7 billion valuation. But earlier in the summer of 2024, I attended Stanford's Mineral X conference, which has close relationships with Cobalt, and began to engage there with some of the PhD students at Stanford. One factor that I'll just kind of mention that is kind of goes back to our vision for the sector, but it's something that's been really important for me, is understanding how we can marry the best field science with the best data science. And, I think when you think about the opportunities for collaboration between, for example, Canada and the United States is, in the United States, you don't have that same tradition of, developing the expertise associated with really being on the ground, developing mineral projects that you see in Canada and the UK for that matter, and obviously Western Australia. But you do have deep pockets of capital, and you have really outstanding, probably top tier in the world technical expertise when it comes to data science. So how you marry those together, I think, is going to be a really big opportunity for the space. And it's something that we have, let's say, some advanced initiatives there related to artificial intelligence and data science in general that I think we'll be able to announce in the near future.
Yeah. And lastly, what's the outlook for Canstar Resources as 2025 starts and for the rest of the year? How's the company going to progress and meet its objectives?
Yeah, so 2024 was for us really a foundational year. I think it's appropriate that we're having this conversation in January. I joined Canstar in January, so that year was really focused on getting a better understanding of the projects, doing some of the foundational work. We've done new geological models for all of the projects and the key project areas that we want to explore more. We've done 3 field programs. A lot of prospecting, infill prospecting, soil sample collecting, till sample collecting. We've also done, we've brought in some of the personnel that we've discussed as well. So it's really been, a lot of foundation building, identifying potential acquisition targets to grow the asset base. 2025, we have a clear plan for developing each of the key 3 project areas. So at the Golden Bay project, it's really going to be focused on, first and foremost, the antimony opportunity there, tracing some of the old veins that were discovered. One of the studies that we actually just received in December that was really important for us was a glaciological study to better understand the ice flows and the till anomalism that we're seeing with antimony and gold on the project. I think that's going to be able to inform much more productive trenching opportunities for us and ultimately be able to generate some near-term drill targets for antimony there at the Golden Bay project. At the Buckens project, we're looking at a deep IP geophysics survey, and I think that's going to have the potential to provide us with more information on the 2017 SkyTEM survey anomalies that are coinciding with that deeper Buckens River formation opportunity that we've identified there, and can lead to the drill targeting as the next step after the geophysics there. So that program we would expect to undertake and start in the winter, and then be done with that, let's say, towards the end of the first quarter. And then with the Mary March project, we will be applying some new technology to identify where that to better understand the displacement vectors and the structural settings there to be able to generate some drill targets there. So if I could say, sort of broadly speaking, it's really we've done the foundational work, we've brought in the teams, we now have sort of a path to generating the next drill programs for each of these 3 project areas. I'd expect to undertake more substantive drilling on the project areas in the summer and fall of 2025, with the potential for some lighter drilling even earlier than that, depending on the results from this next round of studies And then the other big factor for us, that's going to be going forward is looking to, leverage the expertise of Dr. David Kilcullen that we brought in, and the analysis that we're doing and undertaking on the sensitivities of the commodities to the national security sector, and look to make an acquisition that would actually position ourselves a little bit further on the development curve for a project. So something that's sort of resource stage or higher would be a target for us to close on in 2025.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your time. Explain, obviously, there's a lot to unpack there. Tell us, obviously, about Canstar, what you've done so far. Obviously, as you mentioned, last year was putting together a strategy to move forward, and really wish you well for 2025. And hopefully you can come on the podcast later this year or even next year and give us an update on what you've achieved during 2025. And we can obviously speak about geopolitical, because obviously there'll be a lot of things happening during 2025. So it'd be good for you to come back on and give us an update on a few of those things.
Thanks a lot, Rob. I appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, no worries. And if our audience wants to reach out to you, if they want to follow, obviously, the Canstar story, how can they go about doing that? What social media channels are you on?
Yeah, social media, we maintain active presence on LinkedIn as well as X, formerly Twitter. You can look at Canstar Resources, Inc., and we should come up there. And of course, people can always reach out to me directly. My email is JC, that's Juan Carlos, JC at canstarresources.com. Always happy to hear from people and answer any questions they might have.
Yeah, great. And they're going to be enclosed in our show notes for easy access. So all the best for 2025, and hopefully we will chat very soon.
Thanks a lot, Rob.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed that episode. Obviously, a lot to unpack there, as I mentioned. So I would really appreciate if you can share this episode with, obviously, people within the mining industry. But as I always say, please share the episode with people outside of our industry. This episode obviously is not, we haven't just been speaking about mining. We've obviously been speaking about a political risk as well, and obviously wider commodities market. So please share this episode far and wide. Thank you for listening. And until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.